Top of a new hour, millions of Americans are bracing for what is likely to be a catastrophic event on the southeastern coast of the United States. Hurricane Florence threatening to hit the U.S. as a Category 4 storm. At this point, welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
Nice to be with you today. September 11th. We're not going to forget about it. We're just going to get some more news in while we can. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. 4 states already making emergency declarations ahead of the storm's expected landfall late Thursday, early Friday morning. We'll watch and see the way it wiggles between now and then. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper urging everyone in the path to heed the warnings and to find shelter now.
The forecast places North Carolina in the bullseye of Hurricane Florence, and the storm is rapidly getting stronger. When weather forecasters tell us life-threatening, we know that it is serious. Let me be clear. North Carolina is taking Hurricane Florence seriously, and you should too.
Well, Team Fox coverage begins now. Dr. Neil Jacobs from NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He's here in a moment. But first, Jonathan Serra is live in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. What have you seen so far today, Jonathan?
Hi, Bill. The winds are slowly picking up, but by and large, it has been deceptively calm. A clear day, drawing many people out to the beach to grab one last look before this storm arrives. But local officials are saying now is the time during this calm to prepare for the storm. And indeed, many residents and visitors are doing just that. Throughout the Carolinas, many people have been topping off their tanks, heading out of town. At noon today, South Carolina officials plan to reverse lanes on 4 major highways leading in and out of Charleston and Myrtle Beach, so that all lanes of these highways will be carrying traffic away from the coast.
And we know that this evacuation order that I'm issuing is going to be inconvenient for some people. It's going to be inconvenient, but we do not want to risk one South Carolina life in this hurricane.
And that evacuation order in South Carolina alone is expected to impact 1 million people, Bill.
Some people will stay behind. It always happens that way. What about people who decide to stay behind on the coast there, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, authorities certainly advise against it, but they're also realistic, and they know anytime there's a hurricane, no matter how serious, there are going to be some diehard residents and visitors who decide to stay behind. 911 dispatchers are urging people to triage their own emergencies. In other words, only call 911 if it's a life-threatening emergency. Listen. Okay, and we don't have that sound, but they're saying that, for example, if you're in a house and it's flooding, that's not a 911 call. But if those flood waters are threatening your life, then you call 911. They also say that when weather conditions get particularly bad, first responders simply aren't going to be able to get to you. Instead, they'll take your name and number and contact you once conditions improve and see if you still need help. Bill?
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll be back with you a lot in the coming days. Jonathan Serra there in Wrightsville.
Watching its track for more on all of this, let's bring in Dr. Neil Jacobs, Deputy Administrator at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Jacobs, you are a former resident of the state of North Carolina. You have family there. What can you tell us about the evacuation efforts that are underway?
The evacuation efforts are going very well. I would urge people to follow the instructions of the state and local emergency managers. They need to get this process started early because places like the Outer Banks are not easy to get people off of.
What can you tell us about this path as we're watching the projected path right now? Category 4, winds 130 miles per hour. What update can you give us there?
The projected path at the 11 a.m. update hasn't changed much. We're expecting a landfall sometime on Friday, but the wind field, the important message here is that the wind field is a couple hundred miles across in either direction. So you'll feel tropical storm force winds well in advance on Thursday, and it'll spread across North Carolina and South Carolina. As
far as who is most at risk as this reaches the southeastern coast, what can you tell us about the path as far as how wide in range it will reach?
Well, typically the worst part is on the northeastern side of the storm as it makes landfall, but you'll see a tremendous amount of storm surge, coastal flooding, high waves, and that as you move further inland, there's going to be a tremendous amount of rain. A lot of the models are projecting the storm to slow down once it makes landfall.
Some are warning this could be the Harvey of the East Coast. Is that in line with your projections and what you're seeing?
There are quite a few models that are putting down as much as 20 or more inches of rain in parts of North Carolina.
Sounds like a lot are looking at the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario with what you're seeing?
The best case scenario would be that it actually recurves and stays offshore, but the models, there's a tremendous amount of consensus between the suite of models that we look at, and that is becoming less and less likely.
How difficult do you think the evacuation efforts are going to be? You gave us a bit of a preview there, but taking shelter, some will do, some will evacuate altogether. What does that ultimately look like as this storm nears?
I would just urge people to follow the directions of whoever their state and local emergency managers are and move inland. Most of these routes are marked. And probably just move definitely away from the coast.
Deadly flooding obviously is a big threat as well.
Yes, yes, and it will actually be inland as well because of the tremendous amount of rain.
It is a monster storm. It kind of feels like it started and came out of nowhere. We're just sort of at the beginning of season here. What is the overall season starting to look like to you as we eye this monster storm, Florence, as it heads towards the southeastern coast?
So we had projected that this season would be near average to slightly below average, and it still looks like it's on track for that. This week is pretty close to the peak of the hurricane season, so it's not surprising that we see a lot of activity. But even though we're projecting an average season, it doesn't mean that we can't have a major hurricane make landfall.
Well, we hope to get more updates from you as this storm continues to make its way towards the coast. Over 1 million people have been ordered to evacuate. Dr. Neil Jacobs, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
It is a monster storm, Bill, and
Yes.
a dangerous one indeed.
Carolina Shore is some of the most beautiful beaches you'll find in the whole world, especially at low tide. And the Hemmer family has been going down there for the Carolina coast for about 40 years now. And a lot of folks, not just living there, but up and down the East Coast and in the Northeast, back into the Midwest, they made second homes down there for a long time, and they make a lot of family memories there during the summertime. So you're drawing in the attention of tens of millions of people with a storm of this size. And his best hope is that it turns north. I mean, we wish and hope and pray it could turn north and then kick back out to the ocean. But it just seems like with each passing hour, Sandra, that this storm is just big enough, and that high steering current in the Northeast is going to prevent that from happening.
Relentless rainfall.
I wish that would change, but right now it doesn't look like it will.
Based on what we just heard from Dr. Neil Jacobs, it doesn't sound like that's the case, but this monumental rainfall, totals of up to 40 inches possible at this point. We'll see how it changes and watch its path.
Yeah, a bit earlier today we were talking to Janice, and I mentioned that storm in the late 1990s. It was Hurricane Floyd. And there was a big storm. This was a Cat 5. It was barreling into right around the Daytona Beach, Jacksonville Beach area. And it took a right-hand turn and went north. The problem is when it went north, it lost a little bit of its power, but it stalled over the Carolinas, and it was a rainmaker of historic proportions in North Carolina. And, you know, some of the projections suggest that it could happen again if you get a stall of this magnitude. And you're talking about 40 inches of rain, and you just imagine what would happen there.
Expected to make landfall early Friday, and Neil Jacobs seemed to be in line with that as well. That is a big storm, Bill Hemmer.
Yes, it is.
Evacuate.
We will tell you what you need to know. We're going to get updates from Janice and the Hurricane Weather Centers for about every 3 hours for the next several days. So more on that coming up. That is Florence. This, meanwhile, is the FBI. Fox News.